As you've seen from the thumbnail, I've gone and I've done a little thing. I'm going to shift full blame and responsibility once again to our resident enabler here on my channel, one of the resident enablers here on my channel, our beloved Alicia Archer. Poor Alicia has no idea for how many of my purchases she has unknowingly taken the blame. So the two palettes in question are both from Viseart, a brand that you probably haven't really seen on my channel. Those of you who have been around my channel for a really long time will remember that many years ago I had a little mini palette from Viseart that I decluttered because at the time I was super into indie eyeshadows, like very impactful, very sparkly, like you know, substantial eyeshadows. So Viseart did absolutely nothing for me. It was absolutely not a formula for me at the time, but many years have passed and I think my tastes have certainly changed. I've broadened a little bit my horizon in terms of the types of textures and formulas that I enjoy. I can enjoy, you know, a full-fledged Blitz Astral from Pat McGrath, but I can also enjoy something a little bit more subtle. So I thought, you know what, I saw these two palettes being demoed by Alicia. One of them she demoed a really long time ago, one of them she demoed fairly recently because to my knowledge both of these were originally meant to be limited edition around Black Friday last year. These are the Lilas LUMIÈRE ÉTENDU and the PRALINE ÉTENDU, and they were recently brought back in stock. Last I saw, like a week ago, they were still in stock on the Viseart website. Now I will add also this. I was lucky enough to find these on our local, like, second-hand web shop, and I purchased them second-hand. They had basically never been used, or like maybe once or twice per palette, so they're essentially in brand new condition, and I purchased them for about 35 euros each, which I think is not very far off from the original price of the palettes, but I'm not the kind of person that will knock off the price of something that clearly looks like it hasn't been used. I think that even when you purchase things secondhand, you need to remain respectful towards the person who's selling it, because if they haven't really used it and it looks brand new, then it's really like disrespectful to me to ask them to sell it half off or something. Like, I wouldn't accept an offer like that. So I always try to keep it very respectful when I offer prices for secondhand items. Now in this specific case I thought, you know, she's asking almost the original price of these, but they seem brand new, and she actually threw a little freebie in there. She threw the Petit Force Sakura Lotus little quad here, which I am not going to keep because it is really not a color story for me. I'm not going to do anything with it. And this brings me to why I didn't purchase these from the Viseart website if the price was really not that far off. The reason I didn't purchase them from the Viseart website is because, to my shock and dismay, when I went to check out, the price for the shipping, not surprisingly, was steep. It was around 14 euros. But what was really shocking to me was the estimated delivery time of the palette, which stood somewhere between 2 weeks and a month. And I was a bit shocked that you're paying essentially the price of something that would be shipped with some sort of an express service, but you would get it in possibly a month. So I'm not really sure what's going on here, because I believe they're shipping from the EU, so I really don't understand. So as soon as I saw that the shipping frame is within a month, I thought, there's no fucking way I'm going to order this. So I was either going to completely forgo the release and just get over my temptation, or find it secondhand. I did not find any of these on Vinted. Like I said, it was just a stroke of luck that I found them here on our local secondhand web shop, which, for those of you who are from the Netherlands, we're talking about Marktplaats here. The way I'm going to do this video is I want to do demos with both of the palettes. I think I'm just going to do the swatches like desk view, maybe do some comparison swatches if I really feel like it, if I have more time in the weekend, because right now I have to go to work in a little bit and I just want to do a quick demo with one of the palettes. Now let me quickly show you the two palettes. So the Viva LUMIÈRE ÉTENDU is this really beautiful rosy taupe color story. And the Praline palette is essentially, do you know how Mocha Mousse is like the color of the year? This palette to me embodies Mocha Mousse to the T. It is a beautiful light, you know, sort of warm toned brown neutral palette, and you're probably asking yourself, Mariam, don't you have these eyeshadows over and over again in your collection? Yes, I do. I could bust out my Natasha Denona palettes, my Pat McGrath palettes, a bunch of my quads from luxury brands, and you can bet I have probably all of these eyeshadows between all of these palettes. However, I am very intrigued to try the formula of Viseart again and see what I think about it so many years later. Let me think. I think I was pregnant when I decluttered the Viseart palette that I had at the time. So we're talking about 2018, and possibly I had purchased the palette even earlier than that in 2017. It's been a while. So I'm just very intrigued about my experience with Viseart now that my tastes have changed a little bit. And I must tell you, I think the two color stories really are quite brilliant. I really like the combination. I like the combination of the textures because there are some satin shades, some like sparklier, more impactful shades. The mattes are really beautiful undertones. So overall, the two palettes just really appealed to me. So I was curious about Viseart, but I was also very intrigued by these color stories. So even though I have them over and over again in my collection, I thought they're beautiful little curations, and I thought it was a good entry point for me back into Viseart. So now I'm going to leave you with the swatches for this palette, just like arm swatches, desk view, possibly with some comparison swatches, like I said, if I have time. And then I'm going to zoom you back in and we will do an eye look with this palette. Okay, you guys, here are swatches of the LUMIÈRE ÉTENDU palette. I have swatched the eyeshadows starting from the top row and then moving onwards to the bottom two rows. So starting off, we have this shade here, which is like a very light pink shade, like a matte pink shade. I don't know how this is going to translate on people of deeper skin tone. This might look quite ashy. Then we have this beautiful sort of like neutral but maybe slightly warm leaning pink. It's a very, very pretty, very ethereal shade. Then we have this matte over here, which is more of your like classic ballet pink matte. Then we have this shade here, which is a neutral to perhaps slightly warm mid-tone brown. Starting on the second row, we have here a light to mid-toned taupe matte eyeshadow. This is very, very nice. This shadow is a beautiful shiny taupe. This eyeshadow is really pretty, but it is also a little bit more warm toned. I wouldn't really call it a gold, I wouldn't really call it a peach, I wouldn't really call it a brown. It has a little bit of all of these, and if my eyes are not deceiving me, there's a little bit of like fine blue purple shimmer in here. Then we have this absolutely beautiful metallic right here on the second row. This is a purple toned taupe, very, very pretty. And then we start off on the last row where we have this shade, which is a beautiful neutral to slightly cool leaning rosy pink shade. Then we have your classic gold. I could have done without this gold. With that said, is it a bad gold? No, it's a nice gold, but I could have done without it. Then the last two matte eyeshadows here are very, very pretty. This is like a deeper version of this shade right here. It's a mid-tone taupe brown, which can be built up, I think, to be quite dark. And then finally we have this shadow here. This is the deepest shade in the palette, which is a dark brown matte. Let me intensify that a tiny bit. I definitely noticed that the matte eyeshadow formula from Viseart is very soft, very powdery, and it doesn't necessarily swatch the best. With that said, that is certainly not an indication that the eyeshadows are going to perform poorly on the eyelids, because usually it's like softer, fluffier, very powdery mattes. They blend very nicely on the skin, they just don't really swatch all that well. And here once again a bit more of a close-up. I want to do just a couple of comparison swatches. Like I said, as soon as I saw this palette, for some reason I immediately thought of specifically the I Need a Nude palette from Natasha Denona. Now, unfortunately, my I Need a Nude is no longer in its original configuration because I made a mix of my Glam and I Need a Nude palettes, and now I have all of the mattes from both palettes in one, housed in one of the components. And hopefully you can see that just even if you look at these palettes, there is so much overlap and similarity going on. So I want to do a couple of relevant comparison swatches. I'm not going to overdo it because honestly, otherwise we would be here forever. So I'm going to start off with the matte eyeshadows, and I'm actually very curious how, for example, some of these mattes here are going to compare to some of these mattes from the Viseart palette. So let's start by tone. So let's say that this shade here, like the rosy shade, and this one here, which is also a rosy undertone, but it's just a slightly deeper undertone. Let's see how those are going to compare to some of the rosy mattes in, I want to say, I Need a Nude. A lot of these that I'm going to compare today are in fact from I Need a Nude. So the only similar shade that I see is this one here, which has a more of a rosy undertone to it. but in fact it's translating really taupe. Yeah, no, this has a much more cool leaning taupe vein running through it. So these two are much more rosy in fact compared to the one from I Need a Nude. Alright, let's compare some of these taupe shades because I am deeply intrigued by those specifically. So let's start off with this like lighter taupe shade here and this somewhat deeper taupe shade because I want to compare those to these two eyeshadows up here. So Viseart taupes versus I Need a Nude taupes. Natasha Denona, even in terms of their texture, you can see if I put them on my fingers, there isn't as much powder buildup on my fingers, they're much creamier in texture. But let's find out how they compare. I mean, they're certainly not very different from each other. I would say, as I thought, the one from I Need a Nude here, this shade here, is quite much more cool toned and grey toned compared to the shade here from the I Need a Nude palette, which in fact is more like your beigey brown. Finally, let's compare this more mid-toned taupe shade here from Viseart to this mid-tone taupe here, which is also from I Need a Nude. I think a lot of these other ones are from the Glam palette. Oh, these are quite similar to each other. I would argue that there's maybe a touch more grey in the shade from Viseart compared to the one from I Need a Nude, but honestly at this point I'm splitting hairs. And now let us take a closer look at the metallic eyeshadows from the two palettes. I have a few metallics here that are in the matte palette, so let me see if there is something very similar to Swatch. And I think the only similarity I'm detecting is maybe we can swatch these two together. So the light lilac-y taupe from Viseart versus the lilac-y taupe from Natasha Denona. The one from Natasha is certainly more of a deep undertone and definitely much more, yeah, the one from Natasha Denona is much more of a silver taupe, whereas the one from the Viseart palette is that beautiful like pink taupe lilac-y shade. I absolutely love the tone of this shade. This is really, really pretty. This shade I want to compare to both of these, and I'm pretty sure these are from the I Need a Nude palette. They're also like these like taupey browns with a silvery sparkle to them. So let's quickly swatch them. This is Viseart, and then we have these two from the Natasha Denona palette. Again, the one from Viseart is just so much cooler in tone. And there we have Viseart, and here are the two shades from the I Need a Nude palette. These might actually be more similar to some of the shades that are in the Praline. Okay, let's grab this pink eyeshadow here, this one from LUMIÈRE, and compare that to some of the pinks that I have here from the, I want to say Glam palette. I think the pink shades are from the Glam palette. Let's take this one, Viseart Glam. The one in the Glam palette is a little bit more cool tone. The one in the Viseart palette has a slightly warmer undertone to it, but they're both very pretty. I really love this shade from the Glam palette. And finally, we can perhaps swatch the gold shades. I'm pretty sure that the gold shade comes from the Glam palette. So let's compare Viseart Gold versus Glam Gold. Viseart is more of like a bronzy undertone, whereas the the Glam palette is more of your typical gold. There's a bit more orange in here than there is in here. And I think with this we can conclude the swatch portion and the comparison swatch portion for the Lilas LUMIÈRE ÉTENDU palette, and now I'm going to leave you with the eye look. Let's get started. I am going to do something that I haven't done in a while, but I'm just really intrigued to try like as many shades as I possibly can. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this like neutral, sort of cool leaning pink shade, and I'm going to put that in the inner portion of my crease. And let me tell you what I'll do after that. And after that I am going to go into this lighter taupe right above it on the outer side of my crease, and then we're going to deepen up the situation with maybe this one right here. So I'm just going to fluff that right here into the inner portion of the lids. It can be a really fun way to play around a little bit with your matte eyeshadows, to put like one matte in the inner portion of your crease and another in the outer portion of your crease, and it also gives us an opportunity to take a look at the undertone of this. This is really nice. It's soft, it's blending out beautifully. To be honest, I didn't expect any less. I've heard only but superlatives about the matte eyeshadow formula from Viseart in particular, and I recall at the time when I did have, I'm going to take the taupe shade above that by the way now, and I recall from my experience back a few years ago that the mattes I didn't have any issue with. They were really lovely mattes. I recall being disappointed by the shimmers, because the shimmers in the palette that I had at the time, and it was a colorful palette, I recall purples and greens in my mind, they were more of a satin nature than metallic. There was not a single shimmer or anything of the sort in there. By the way, something that immediately strikes me is that these are quite powdery, so powder is going to be flying around everywhere. You need to be a little bit careful, but with that said, I love the undertones of these eyeshadows. They are so beautifully, deliciously cool toned, just as I was hoping for. I think this is a beautiful curation of neutral to cool eyeshadows. Probably one of the best that I've seen on the market recently. Like, I think if I compare this to, strictly speaking, the I Need a Nude palette, not the Glam but the I Need a Nude palette, I think the undertones in here are not as rosy. I think I Need a Nude has a very strong rose vein running through it, which makes it so that not everyone will like it as a cool toned palette, whereas this sits a little bit more, I feel like, neutral toned. It's still cool toned, but leaning a bit more towards the neutral side of things. Okay, these two applied really lovely. I'm really enjoying what's going on in my crease right now. And I've purchased both palettes, but I purchased them also with the idea that if after a few months of use it turns out that I am very attracted to specific shades and other shades never get used, I'm just going to pull them out, because I think these are interchangeable. I think you can pop out, I'm pretty sure you can pop out the pens of these eyeshadows, and then I can rearrange them and keep the best to make sort of like a neutral eyeshadow palette from Viseart for myself, and then possibly declutter the rest. But we will see. Maybe I will end up falling in love with both palettes and I will keep them as they are. Next, I'm going to take this somewhat deeper taupe here to apply in the outer corner of the lids. I'm taking more of a pointy crease brush and going into that neutral shade. I'm very curious for you guys to share your experience with Viseart. I know pretty much everyone loves Viseart. I don't know that I've heard of anyone who doesn't like Viseart. Again, beautifully neutral and really leaning more towards the gray neutral than towards the pink neutral. So for those of you who found I Need a Nude a little bit too pink leaning in tone, I think you might enjoy Lilas LUMIÈRE quite much more. I'm really enjoying so far the matte eyeshadows that I applied on my lids. I actually think I'm going to put that same eyeshadow also on my lower lashes. I'm just going to run it very gently here with the same brush. Now, some of the metallics here do look like they have a little bit of a flake going on to them, or they're a bit more impactful, so I'm going to take a little bit of glitter glue to apply in the inner corner and lid area, just so the metallics have the best chance to stand out as much as possible, just the way I like them. And I'm sure you can use these eyeshadows with a brush, but I'm actually just very curious to stick my fingers into them, because I'm filming everything out of order, so the swatch part of this is going to be filmed after this. So in fact, I haven't really touched these eyeshadows yet. I'm very intrigued. This specific eyeshadow here immediately grabbed my attention when Alicia put it on her lids. I'm just going to take this metallic eyeshadow, which looks like the most delicious mid-toned taupe shade, and I'm going to apply that here towards the outer portion of the lid, and oh, that's really pretty. I like that. That is actually a really impactful metallic shade. Possibly more than what I expected from Viseart. You know, back in the day I remember they didn't really have textures like this. They had a lot of those like satiny type shadows, but I can't remember them having such impactful metallic shades. Of course, it's been quite a few years since 2018, but I am just really enjoying this eyeshadow. It is absolutely beautiful. Okay, now I am actually going to grab a brush, because I think it just will make life a little bit easier. And I am going to go into the next shade that intrigues me greatly, which is this silver lilac right here, which I think I will put like all over the inner portion of my lid, and a bit to overlap with the taupe. They're so unexpectedly like blingy that I must even warn you that they might be the type of shades that do create a little bit more texture if you have more texture on your lids. They look like the types of metallics that could look a little bit chunky if you're not careful or if you have more textured lids. Actually, I would love to hear from those of you who have this palette and feel like their lids are a bit more textured. Do you feel like these metallics from Viseart accentuate texture on your lids? For this next step, I'm going to take the light pink champagne here and I'm going to pop that right here on the lower portion of my lash line, just so I can see as many of the eyeshadows as possible. But so far I'm really loving what's going on my lids. This is very, very pretty. And that might be total overkill now, but I am going to take a little pencil type brush from Sonia G and go into the deepest brown shade and use that for a little smoked liner situation. Right here, very close to the lashes, nothing too crazy. Just to give a little bit definition there, and I'm going to lightly wing it out, but I'm going to keep it very soft, just like a touch of that wing. Let's take a look at these under artificial lighting, because I'm actually quite intrigued. Okay, under artificial lighting you can see that there is a good amount of shimmer in here, but I hope it's coming across on camera. We're not talking about chunky glitter, we're talking about nice, elegant, sophisticated shimmers. This looks really pretty under artificial lighting. You can probably tell that I'm not wearing a ribbon in the end because I think I went a little bit over enthusiastically on the eye look, and I think ribbon just calls for a little bit more of a subtle eye look. So I decided to still go for a red but substitute the texture for a softer one. And what is softer than the soft matte formula from Prada? So this is the soft matte from Prada in the shade Granato. A much, you know, less pigmented, less opaque formula. So I think it works really well with the look. So you guys, I really like how this look turned out. I think it's really elegant. I think where these eyeshadows really impressed me is the undertones. They just look like the most sophisticated, elegant, grown-ass lady, you know, neutral cool eyeshadows, and I'm absolutely loving them. I love the eye look. Let me know what you thought about it, but so far I'm really impressed. I like the textures of the eyeshadows, but I didn't expect any less from Viseart. I was quite surprised that the metallics are really metallicing these days, but the undertones of these are just absolutely stunning. Okay, we will see each other again tomorrow for a look with the Praline palette, and yeah, so far so good. Let's start off with some swatches of the Praline palette. I didn't pace myself very well, so unfortunately the last eyeshadow here is swatched a little bit above. But let me take you through the swatches of this palette. So again, starting off with the top row and then moving to the lower ones. Overall, if I look at this palette, I think of mocha mousse meets caramel with a touch of gold, basically. But starting off with this shade here, this is like your typical light gold champagne, very pretty. This is a very yellow toned vanilla eyeshadow. Then we have this eyeshadow here, this like mid-tone brown shade, which has a beautiful neutral undertone to it. Then we have this light satin gold. Moving on to the second row, we have a caramel camel toned mid-tone brown shade, very pretty, but this is a shade I've seen quite a lot of times. Moving on to this shade, which is more of like a satin mocha brown. Next to that we have this light champagne mocha shade. Finally, on the second row, we have this very interesting smoky gold shade. It's a very interesting shade. I don't know that I've ever seen a gold quite like this one. Finally, on the bottom row, we have this beautiful sparkly, or like not sparkly, but like very bright and shiny peach. Very pretty. Then next to that we have a somewhat deeper caramel brown. Then we have the probably most impactful metallic in this palette. I think compared to the Lilas Lumière, this one has less impactful eyeshadows in terms of the metallic formula, and this is, I think, the most impactful shade that is present in this palette. It's this gorgeous rosy brown with quite a fair amount of shimmer in it. And finally we have the dark brown, which I swatched up here because unfortunately I ran out of space. Going back to my glam slash I need a nude palette situation, and let's take a look whether there is some more comparisons to be made here. I think perhaps these mattes are more going to be from the glam than they really are going to be from the I need a nude palette, but we could swatch this caramel brown and this more neutral brown up against this shade here, because I feel like it's neither of the two, but we should probably verify that. Let me swatch Viseart right here. I'm really covered in swatches that I can barely remove at this point, so my hand is a little bit dirty. And now let's grab this shade here, which I am pretty sure comes from the Glam palette. This is quite different from this one here. So this brown here from the Viseart palette is quite unique. I don't know that I have anything that's quite like it. This is beautiful and so neutral in tone. I did come up with a comparison that I really wanted to make, which is between Viseart and the Betty palette from Lisa Eldridge. And the two eyeshadows that I want to compare are these two. This gorgeous metallic here versus Posh from the Betty palette, because they strike me as quite similar. Okay, here we have the Viseart shade, and next to that I'm swatching Betty from Lisa Eldridge, and there's a bit more richness, like a bit more of like a chocolate rich undertone to the shade from Viseart compared to the one from Lisa Eldridge, but I do think that there is like a similar vein running through these two eyeshadows. They're very, very pretty and I like both of them a lot. One final comparison that I want to make just to indulge in my own curiosity is when I saw this eyeshadow, it sort of reminded me a little bit of my beloved Golden Polaris from the Interstellar Icon Quad. With that said, I don't think they're going to be super similar because the one from Pat is just so much more impactful compared to the one from Viseart, but I want to satisfy my curiosity and see whether there's any, similarity that I detect between the two. So here we have the Viseart shade, which is more of like a nice satin finish, and this is the shade from Pat, which is absolutely glorious. Glorious. It has this gorgeous chunky pink sparkle to it. The shade from Viseart is perhaps slightly deeper in its undertone, but there is a similar vein running through these two eyeshadows. Okay, you guys, this was fun, but like I said, I'm not going to be overdoing the comparison swatches, so I'm going to leave it at this. If there's any particular comparison swatch that you would like me to do, hit me up on Instagram, because that's usually the best way to get me to swatch compare something, because I can immediately bust it out, send you a photo, and answer your queries. But for now I'm just going to leave it at that, and let's do a look with the Praline palette. Alright, you guys, time for a mocha mousse look with the gorgeous Praline ÉTENDU palette from Viseart. I am going to start off the look with this beautiful mid-tone neutral brown right here, and I'm going to apply that throughout my crease, because I'm actually very curious about the undertone of this brown. The other browns look to be very classic, warmer, camel-toned browns, so I think they're a little bit more of a shade that I'm familiar with, but this shade looks very intriguing because it has a gorgeously neutral undertone to it, and to be honest with you, on the eye it also is applying pretty neutral, at least on my skin tone. I'm very happy with it. So a little update. Yesterday I wore the look with the Lilas LUMIÈRE palette the whole day, and I gotta tell you, the more the hours passed by, the more these eyeshadows melted onto my skin, and they just looked more and more beautiful as the time went by. They almost acquired this glow from within kind of quality, and I really enjoyed them. I looked at myself in the mirror every now and then throughout the day, and I thought, gosh, these eyeshadows just look so beautiful together. They look beautiful on the skin. I was deeply impressed with how these eyeshadows wore. And I can tell you for a fact, this was definitely not the experience that I had when I first tried Viseart, but I'm pretty sure that when I tried Viseart, my taste in makeup was completely different. Now, since this palette actually houses an eyeshadow that I can use as a brow bone highlight, I'm just going to do that. I'm going to take this vanilla shade right here to apply as a brow bone highlight. I'm going to grab a small pencil brush, and the first thing I'm going to do is take the brown shade that I have through my crease to apply also on my lower lashes, just to create a cohesive look. And even though I don't really feel like I need it, because I think this shadow created quite a bit of definition as it is in my outer corner and crease area, I think I might still go in with a darker brown just to intensify and define the lash line a bit more. So I'm going to use this very same pencil brush And I'm going to grab this dark brown here, which also looks to have a beautifully neutral undertone to it. And I kind of like that the shadows have this like papery type thing which protects the eyeshadows, but also once it flaps like this, it protects my clothes from the fallout that the eyeshadows might be causing. Because a lot of times when I'm showing you things and I'm swirling my brush into the eyeshadow, a lot of the eyeshadows fall onto my clothes, and sometimes that's really a problem. If I'm wearing like a light color of dress or jeans, they immediately get stained with eyeshadow. So this little flap here is actually quite convenient. Okay, working this dark brown here in the lash line to just create a bit of definition there. And then I have to think real hard which metallic shades I'm going to use on my lid, because I've got several real good candidates. I mean, ultimately I'm going to try all of them, but for today it's going to be hard to choose which one I want to start with. I can tell you for a fact I don't want to do the golds, or at least not super prominently in the look. Maybe I'll pop one here on the lower lashes, but I am much more intrigued by the actual browns in here. I'm going to grab a bit of glitter glue, the NYX glitter glue, just so the metallic eyeshadows have a tacky base to grip onto, so that they perform at their best once I pop them onto my lids. And I think I've decided what I want to do on the eyelids. I'm going to take a flat shader brush and I want to apply a little bit of this shade here, which is like this light mocha brown, and this shade here, which looks to be like a peachy brown and honestly reminds me a lot of my beloved Golden Polaris from Pat McGrath Labs. Obviously not the same texture, but I'm detecting some similarities. So I'm actually curious how that shade would look on the lid. But first I'm going to apply the mid-tone mocha brown shade here in the outer portion of the lid. And again, I can't stress this enough. There is particles of shimmer in these eyeshadows, but they're not glittery. So yesterday, throughout the day, I could see little like shimmer particles in artificial lighting, but I couldn't really see glitter. Nonetheless, the eyeshadows had that beautiful glow. I can't get over how beautiful they looked on the lids over the course of the day. Alright, going to clean off the brush, and now I'm going to apply the peachy nude on the inner portion of the lid. Very curious about this shade. You know what? The tone of this shade does remind me a lot of Golden Polaris. It doesn't have quite the same impact, and I think Golden Polaris still has a bit more like a rosy undertone to it. This is more peachy, but they give me that same vibe. Also, very pretty shade. I'm really enjoying where this look is going. I don't know that I have an array of browns, like a palette of browns in my collection that is quite like Praline. Very pretty. Then I'm going to clean off my brush really well, and I'm going to take this shade here, which seems to be the perfect champagne gold highlighter, and I'm going to put that here in the inner portion of the lid. Oh, that's pretty. That really glows in the inner corners. Gorgeous. And like I said, on my lower like the inner portion of my lower lashes, I'm going to apply one of them golds, because I'm wearing like this mustard yellow skirt today, and I think that might fit really well. The question is which one. You know what, let's go with this one. I'm going to apply a bit of this on the inner portion here. Now, these golds here are the part of the palette that I'm a bit more skeptical about, in the sense that I would have much rather had different undertones of those like mocha mousse shades, like the brown type shades. More neutral, slightly cooler, slightly warmer, slightly rosier, like a bigger array of the brown shades instead of the golds. Let's do a quick sparkle moment, because I wanted to verify what I already suspected. I think the eyeshadow that I put from the Lilas palette yesterday was more shimmery than the one that I have on my lids today. So guys, this is the final look. I'm absolutely loving the little mocha mousse moment that I have going on both on my eyes and on my lips. On my lips I am wearing the beautiful Lisa Eldridge Velvet Affair. Affair and I have been having a bit of a love affair going on in the past year. Our affair was possibly not love at first sight, but it has turned into a very long-term committed relationship. Now, I think I'm actually going to also wrap up this video here because I don't really know that there's much more to add at this moment, since I've only done one look with each palette, besides the fact that these eyeshadows are pretty much what I expected. They range between subtle and slightly more metallic finishes. They don't look glittery and really impactful on the lids, but they do look very mature, very elegant. So if you're the type of person who thinks that sometimes Natasha Denona and Pat McGrath eyeshadows can be just too glittery for your taste, then I think these are going to suit you much better. I think the eyeshadows that I'm possibly more impressed by are the mattes, and not so much so because I'm impressed by the formula. Don't get me wrong, the formula is really solid. These are absolutely outstanding matte eyeshadows, but what I'm really impressed by is the undertones. I was impressed by the undertones in the Neutral Cool palette yesterday, the Lilas one, and once again today I'm so impressed by the brown shades. The one that I put through my crease has my heart. I'm going to be reaching for this palette specifically to use this brown shade. I absolutely love the tones of the matte eyeshadows in these palettes. So overall, I'm very pleased with this purchase. I'm still not sure that I'm going to keep all the eyeshadows. I think ultimately, after some months of use, if I come to the conclusion that I'm using half of the Lilas and half of the Praline, I might make a bit of a mix between the two and just combine my favorite eyeshadows in one palette and then put the rest in the other palette and declutter that. I'm definitely going to give you a full review once I have gotten the chance to really get to know these palettes. I'm curious what you think about them. Do you have them? I know that they've been around for a little bit, so possibly some of you have already had them for a couple of months and you have more full-rounded thoughts. I would love to hear those. As usual, thank you so much for watching, and we will see each other again in my next video. Bye!